Let's get started. Please welcome Courtney K.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. So interacting with customers can be extremely brutal sometimes. And it feels like in tech, there's no position that is immune from working with customers. When I talk about customers, I don't mean the public-facing type. I'm talking about our end users. I mean our boss, our coworkers, that one department down the hall that nobody quite knows what they do. They're all people who we support. And in order to support them, you have to communicate with them. If you have a policy that you need to push, or if there's a patch that needs to be run, or even something as simple as your coworker coming to you with a question about their email, it all requires you to communicate with them. And when that communication starts to break down, things start to get ugly real fast. The customer becomes dissatisfied, they're unwilling to adopt changes that you're suggesting, frustrations mount, and in the end, zero headway is made. Now, when I was doing some research for this talk, I found some interesting parallels between the relationships of doctors and their patients and IT professionals with their users. Now, studies found that doctors, when they interacted with their patients and practiced good communication skills, that they had a better outcome in their interactions with them, especially in the areas of adherence and in compliance. Now, those two words right there for any tech is music, and definitely something we want our own users to do. So it's easy to extrapolate that the user, just like the patient's willingness and satisfaction to what you're suggesting with them is going to increase, especially when you use good communications. First, a little bit about me. I am Courtney. I have 8 years experience in the technical field, 6 of which were served in the United States Air Force. I currently work at a university in California providing desktop administration and also desktop support. You can find me at Twitter at O3AwesomeSauce. Courtesy. So it can be really hard to be the level-headed and empathetic tech working with a customer day in and day out. But a good tool to use and to remember is the golden rule. Treat others how you would want to be treated. Think about it. We were all noobs once, and we all started from somewhere, and we had to go to somebody for help or ask for guidance. Think about, how did they treat you when you went to them for help? Were they kind and compassionate, or were they rude and dismissive? And more importantly, how did that make you feel? Don't be that rude and dismissive tech when a customer comes to you for questions, and be willing to offer support when they need it too. And by doing this, it really helps put things on a positive spin. And speaking of positivity, be their cheerleader. It is important to realize that they are trying, that they are starting from scratch, and that if they come to you with a bad situation, there's always a nugget of goodness in there. How you respond to a customer is going to dictate the frequency and the expediency in which they have future problems. Now, some of you might be thinking right now, like, yes, Courtney just said, if I am a complete jerk to the customer, they will leave me alone and I won't have to worry about them forever. Which is great until the customer has something go wrong and now their computer is sitting there vulnerable on your network. I had one customer once who fell susceptible to one of those Apple scams, where they call you up and they say that your computer's riddled with viruses. And this customer was so far gone that he not only had given access to his computer, but he had also given them his credit card information as well. And it wasn't until he hung up the phone did the alarm bells start going off into his head and he realized, oh no. So when he called me, I made sure that one of the first things to tell him was that he had done a good job in notifying me as soon as he did. I took a negative situation and found a positive and focused on that. Also, don't be afraid to give praise when praise is due. This really helps, especially with needy customers. And I'll be honest with you guys right now, I've got some super needy customers. Like, we're talking needing to hold their hand as they open their email, kind of needy. So what I try to do is I try to use words of affirmation and try to use uplifting phrases. Things like, "You're doing a great job," or "Keep it up, this is awesome." Giving them that kind of affirmation really helps empower them and also gives them that self-confidence. And over time, those super needy customers I've had are less and less needy. So never tell the customer no. This was a phrase that I had learned when I worked retail in a big box tech store. And looking back, I can totally see that it was a sales technique than anything else. But I found that logic could be applied throughout my whole career when working with customers. And the basic premise is, when a user comes to you with an issue, never just flat out tell them no. Even if the answer is, "I can't do this because of policy," or "you have to shut them down," always try to put a positive spin onto it. Give them options. It may not be options that they're realizing or had anticipated, but it's better than just flat out saying no and then walking away. Also, don't talk over their heads. As we move into clarity, it's important to know who you're talking to as far as your customer and what their level of technical savviness is. Sometimes it can be really easy to get into the technical minutiae of things and really get into the weeds, and the customer has no idea what you're talking about. Also, I noticed an interesting thing about IT is there's a lot of abstract concepts that are really hard for non-technically savvy customers to understand. And so when I try to talk to these types of customers, I use examples like metaphors and real-world examples. I had one customer who she was a little apprehensive on switching over to a cloud-based filing plan that I had recommended to her. So I took that opportunity to use the example of a filing cabinet as the cloud. And I explained to that customer and said to them, well, think about that you can put all of your documents into this filing cabinet and access the filing cabinet from anywhere in the world, from your home, from your library, on your phone when you're on vacation. And by taking that very abstract concept of the cloud and solidifying it into something more concrete, I was able to help the customer wrap their mind around it, and in the end, them complying. Another thing that's really good to use for customers interacting is to help reiterate their concerns. A lot of times customers will come to you and it feels like they're just repeating the same things over and over again, and you want to say, no, I've got this. But a good tool to use is reflective listening. And reflective listening is that where you just simply regurgitate exactly what the customer has said to you back to them. So when Pam comes to me completely stressed out because she can't access her website that she needs to upload important documents to, I'll use reflective listening and tell her, Pam, I totally understand that you have a deadline, you have documents you need to submit, and you can't access this website, so let me get on it. By telling Pam exactly what she was telling me assures her that I'm on it, and then also gives me that wiggle room so she's not constantly pestering me. When I work with customers, day in and day out, I get to have a bird's eye view on how they use their computer. I get to see things like how they access the internet. I get to see things how complex their passwords are. I even get to see Tim and his Excel document sitting on the desktop filled with every username and password he's ever created for the internet. So when I get those moments, I don't use fear tactics and trying to change Tim's ways. I try to take that moment and make it teachable. I'll tell Tim, hey, I noticed that you're working really hard on keeping track of all of your usernames and passwords. Did you know that you could change over to a password manager and it would make your life a lot easier? So by using that and spinning it into a more positive outcome, Tim is not only more likely to stick with it, but I can also make him more secure by selling those advantage points. Also, don't be afraid to use yourself as the example. I am the first person to admit that I just jumped on the password manager bandwagon. And when you use yourself as an example, that lets the customer know two things. It lets them know that they're not in this alone, that, oh, well, hey, Courtney just started doing password things, so it's not too late for me to do it either. And also, it lets them know that they're not alone in that somebody has already blazed the trail, that there's somebody that they can go to for help or questions or tips, and that they don't have to go it alone. Now, don't get bogged down in the technical details. I'll level with you guys, this is something that I struggle with today on a daily basis, especially if the problem that I'm trying to solve is really hard and complex and I figure it out. I get super, super excited. And it's bad, guys. I'll have, like Pam will come up to me and be like, hey, did you figure out the website issue? And then I instantly turn into Tom Hanks from the scene in Castaway, when he's created fire for the first time. And I'm like, yes, I have created a firewall exception. And meanwhile, Pam is just waiting for me to finish so she can turn in her reports. The customer doesn't really care how you figured it out. They just want to know if it's done and if they can finish their own tasks. So realize when it's time to keep it brief and when it's time to go into the technical details of things. So as we move into comprehension, I want to preface and say that I'm not talking about the customer comprehending what you have to say. I mean the IT professional comprehending what the customer has to say. And the very first step into doing this is using active listening. So active listening is slightly different in that it is slightly different than reflective listening, in that it's more participatory. It involves the listener, so you as the IT person, concentrating, understanding, responding, and remembering to what's being told to you. And also, don't jump ahead of the customer. It can be super easy to jump ahead and start problem solving as the customer's sitting there describing their issues. So try not to jump ahead into that. Also, don't be afraid to figure out what the best mode of communication is for your customer. And sometimes that means you have to circumvent normal modes of communication. A good example of this is a story that my coworker had, and this was many years back. And he got a trouble ticket through email, and it was from a customer who was hearing voices in her office. And she was pretty sure it was coming from her computer. So my coworker was completely skeptical at this and just, what the heck? And so instead of emailing her back like he normally would correspond with his customers, he decided to get up and talk to her and see her in person. And when he got there, sure enough, her Macintosh was infected with one of the first viruses, the NVIR, that utilized the text-to-speech function of the machine, and in random intervals would spit out, "Don't panic, don't panic." So the customer was absolutely right. She was hearing voices. And had my coworker not changed up his method of communication, that process of troubleshooting would have taken a lot longer and could have caused a lot of frustration, both on his part and on the customer's part. Also, when a customer comes to you with a problem, it's really important to try and remember that what they present to you might not just be the only thing, that it could be the tip of the iceberg and that there are underlying issues underneath. I had one customer come to me and she brought me a laptop that just had anything and everything that you could think of wrong under the sun was going wrong with it. The sound wouldn't work, she couldn't connect to Wi-Fi, it was randomly rebooting, everything. So instead of getting distracted by all the different details or all the different symptoms, I took 1 second back and looked and thought, okay, asked questions for her and said, well, how long has this been on the network? When was this last rebooted? Trying to understand and get a better, fuller picture of what the problem was. I also went to my coworkers and asked them if they had seen these issues and if they had run into any other similar problems as well. By getting that broader picture, it really helps you not get distracted and really peel back the layers and get to the root of the problem. In this laptop's instance, it just needed to have the drivers updates pushed and then rebooted, something as simple as that. Had I been distracted, it would have caused a lot of heartache, both on my part and a lot of time on the customer's part. So finally, you need to figure out what's best for the customer and your company. And part of doing that is finding out more about what your company's policies are, asking questions about it. How long has this policy been put into place? When was it started? How long ago? Is it outdated? How does it affect the customer and how does it affect me? When you understand those overarching policies of your company, it will better help you when that customer comes to you looking for a solution. You'll be able to create one that's both harmonious with the company and with the user. And also, don't be afraid to get their feedback. Include them in the process. Have surveys at the end of your work tickets or get their feedback after you roll out a new program. It helps them feel more invested in the program, and so later on when you need to have them change to different policies or things like that, they'll be more likely to stick with it because they feel like they're part of the team. Also, it helps you as a tech because they will point out to you small problems that maybe later down the road could have turned into bigger problems, so you can mitigate that. And then finally, document your solutions, please. Help a techie out. In your work notes, create well-defined notation so that way when a tech comes back, they can look at it. Create a knowledge base or a wiki page for your shop. Or even something as simple as share during an all call a time or a situation that you had and how you solved it. That kind of communication with your own coworkers is extremely helpful because 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a coworker who's going to run into the same exact problem as you did or one similar. And by sharing, they'll be able to take those steps that you took and solutions and be able to help their own customers. And so in conclusion, working with customers can be extremely brutal, but your communication doesn't have to suffer. And by practicing the 3 C's, you will have successful interactions with your customers every time. Thank you very much. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Chris, my mentor, and thank you all for coming.